I was already 36 when I found myself back in the same room I grew up in, with the same beige walls, the same faded old posters, and the ceiling fan that still made that annoying noise with every rotation. After 10 years in Austin, my life kind of fell apart. The job that supported my modern lifestyle was unceremoniously cut. My relationship ended 2 weeks later like one thing led to another, and I didn't think I'd hit rock bottom for so long. But I did. Going back to my mom's place felt like a silent failure. But, at the same time, it was comfortable. Here, at least, the days had a peaceful predictability, and I could take care of my mental health while working remotely as a freelancer. I'd always been a designer, and now my world revolved around creating visual identities for mattress stores, psychoanalysis clinics, and Instagram profiles for self-help entrepreneurs. Working from home, wearing the same clothes for 2 or 3 days, ignoring the doorbell, and sleeping late, that became my new normal. And you know what? Most of the time, it was fine. Almost. Of course, as the weeks went by, the boredom and silences started to weigh heavily. I'd find myself dragging chairs around, watching birds out the window, making excuses to go out in the yard, almost as if I was expecting to see someone. That's where Caleb comes in. If this story has piqued your curiosity, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next might surprise even those who think they've seen it all. My mom's house is in an old neighborhood in Arizona. Single-story houses, yards with heat-resistant trees, and a certain suburban tranquility that seems to have stopped in time. During the day, the streets are almost empty. Older neighbors tend their gardens or walk their dogs, and the silence is only broken by the occasional bark of a nervous chihuahua. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. See the link in the description right now. My room faces the back of the house, and from inside, I can see a good part of the yard. My office is in the corner, with my desk against the wall, 2 screens, and an office chair that's going to break and dump me on the floor one of these days. Every day is pretty much the same. I wake up with direct sunlight on my face, make coffee, check emails, spend about 15 minutes staring at a blank screen before I start drawing something. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. See the link in the description right now. But the yard started to get more attention than I even realized. That's because on the other side of the slightly crooked wooden fence, someone lived. The house next door had been rented a few months ago by an older man and his nephew, if I'm not mistaken. I never really saw them in detail at first. What always caught my attention was the sound, some low music coming from over there. Sometimes the creak of a hammock swinging, and, every now and then, a feeling that I was being watched. At first, I thought it was paranoia from my forced isolation, but gradually I started to notice. When I went out to hang laundry, when I opened the back door, when I went to get something near the fence, something told me someone was standing there, quiet, invisible. It was like a warmth on my back, a shiver that hid in the middle of the hot afternoon. It took a while for me to really understand what it was about. One particularly boring day, one of those days when the heat is so lazy it feels like even time is melting, I decided to clean the yard. I bent down to pick up some dry leaves near the fence and saw, out of the corner of my eye, a tiny glint. An eye. Someone was watching me through a hole between the fence boards. But I didn't look away immediately. I stayed there, pretending I hadn't noticed. The gaze disappeared quickly, but I was already sure. Someone was on the other side, watching. I stood up silently, went to the kitchen, and spied from a distance. About 10 minutes later, a boy appeared on the side of the neighboring house. Tall, thin, short, dark hair. He wore an oversized t-shirt and walked with the kind of caution of someone who'd already been caught. He must have been about 18, maybe just turned, with an almost childish air mixed with the typical awkwardness of youth. "Are you the nephew of the guy who lives there?" I asked one morning, days later, when I ran into him near the trash can. He replied with a hesitant, "Yeah." Then, "My name's Caleb. Julian," I said, and extended my hand. The touch was automatic, but the way he looked at my hand before shaking it stuck with me, as if he needed to convince himself it was safe. Or maybe he'd been waiting for it longer than he should have. In the following days, we started seeing each other more often. Sometimes we'd be out at the same time. Sometimes he'd just appear out of nowhere. Always with something to do on the side of the house, but never exactly productive. And I pretended not to notice. But the truth is, I noticed everything. He avoided looking at me directly for more than 3 seconds, but he always smiled. The approach was slow, almost imperceptible, like warm water filling a bathtub. Caleb started showing up more frequently, and every now and then we'd chat right there, leaning on opposite sides of the fence that separated, or connected, depending on your point of view. Us. He'd tell me about his studies, how he was rethinking the course he wanted to take, how he often hid in the backyard just to breathe, away from his uncle's demands. And I listened, more intently than I listened to anyone else. One day, I offered him lemonade. He came to my front door to get it. He didn't come in, but he stood in the doorway between questions about what I did on the computer every day. I showed him one of my projects. He complimented it awkwardly, said he liked the lines, that it looked clean. You seem to know what you're doing. Well, I try, right? But most of the time it's a lot of trial and error. Do you listen to music while you work? Almost always. What about you? What do you like to listen to? He hesitated. Old stuff, like Fleetwood Mac. That wasn't the answer I expected, and maybe it wasn't the one he thought he should give. From that day on, our encounters stretched longer. He'd already be on the porch before I even came out. Sometimes he'd just come over to ask if he could borrow a charger or bring some junk food, like cookies from the supermarket. And our exchange became a comfortable sort of convenience. An unlikely friendship. But I felt, and I know he did too, that there was something under the surface. Something quiet and growing. A kind of current that both of us consciously chose not to mention. Yet, I confess that, even while enjoying those moments, part of me forced myself to keep everything in safe territory. I calculated words, thought before every question. I didn't want to fuel misunderstandings, especially with someone as young as Caleb. The last thing I wanted was to hurt him, to make him feel manipulated or uncomfortable. There was also the other side, the fear of feeling again, because something in me, undeniably, was waking up, and I pretended not to see it. But it was clear. It was visible in the details. The way he looked at my hands when I spoke, how he stood too close for just a second longer than he needed to, how he waited for answers even to obvious statements. And, on the other side, Caleb also seemed to be walking a fine line. He carried a tension that wasn't just about shyness. It was as if he was caught between the urge to act and the fear of screwing everything up. As if the silence between us was a stretched wire and he was holding one end, trying not to let go. One Saturday afternoon he showed up at my door out of nowhere. He was alone. Said his uncle had gone away for a few days. He asked if he could stay for a while, just until someone arrived to open the door. He'd forgotten his key. I offered him water, and without much hesitation, let him in. It was the first time he'd stepped inside the house. And there, inside the house, certainties began to return. At the same time, something in me recoiled. The age difference, the projections, what others would say. All these things flashed through my mind like silent lightning, and I couldn't hide my discomfort. He noticed. If you want me to leave, that's fine, he said without drama. It's not that, I said sincerely. It's just confusing. He nodded, looking at the glass of water in his hands. Then he looked up. I used to watch you through the hole in the fence, every day, and my world stood still. When I heard those words come out of his mouth, I used to watch you through the hole in the fence, every day. Something inside me just stopped. Caleb didn't say it to be dramatic, nor did he seem ashamed. He just stared at the glass in his hand, his shoulders tense, as if he'd finally spoken the truth he'd held on to for too long. There was a silence that, in other circumstances, would have made me uncomfortable. But there, on that muggy late afternoon, it just lifted the weight from the air. I noticed sometimes, I confessed in a calm tone. But I didn't say anything. I didn't mean any harm, he murmured. It was like, I don't know, company. You seemed so distant sometimes. When you were drawing with the door open, sometimes muttering to yourself or lost in your computer. It was like seeing a real person. Not those versions we pretend to be for social media. His sincerity hit me like a warm breeze. It was like hearing out loud something I knew, but denied to myself, that I also needed company. That this whole full independence thing I sold myself was just a mask. That, more than work, routine, and silence, what was missing was someone who truly saw me. Caleb looked at me with his eyes slightly narrowed, not out of shyness, but like someone looking deeply. Sometimes it seemed like you didn't even exist for the neighborhood. But there, inside the house, in front of your screen, it was impossible not to notice you. I reacted with a faint smile, but my throat was too dry to respond with words. He slowly got up from the couch, as if not wanting to break the moment, and walked over to the bookshelf where some of my old drawing books and notebooks were kept. He ran his fingers over the dusty spines, attentive, And without looking back, he said, "You feel lonely here, don't you?" There were so many layers in that yes I gave in response that I was almost surprised it didn't make him collapse on the floor. Caleb turned and looked at me again, this time without defense. His faded shirt was a little off his shoulder, and there was something incredibly human about that boy. Something between fragile and firm, innocent and observant. He sat down near me again, this time keeping a closer distance than what's usually considered polite. We could hear the ticking of the clocks in the house, the sound of the fan in the hallway, and the world outside seemed to want to ignore us in that suspended pause where everything became clearer. "I didn't want this to be weird," he whispered. "Me neither." When our hands finally touched there on the couch, it wasn't cinematic. It was almost imperceptible. A timid brush of fingers. But the warmth that spread between us, like silent electricity, was what changed everything. His skin was warm, a little damp perhaps from nervousness, and I could feel the hesitation mixed with desire, a kind of surrender that wasn't vulgar, but deeply human. His breathing grew heavier. Mine followed its rhythm. I noticed my eyes fixating on the curve of his jaw, the way his long eyelashes curled gently, how his scent was something between neutral soap and newly discovered youth. He must have showered recently. Caleb moved closer, still saying nothing. He looked at my mouth, then my eyes, then back at my mouth, and then, without urgency, without asking permission, he kissed me. It was a light touch, a slow, practiced fit, like testing the ground before moving forward. My hand found its way to the back of his neck, and I felt the short, soft hair under my fingers. The kiss deepened at a calm pace. Nothing needed to be rushed. It was like experiencing something we already knew existed, but were afraid to name. His legs brushed against mine, and I couldn't tell where the warmth of my body ended, and his began. There was a silent connection there, not just of desire, but of relief, of sacred curiosity, of two solitudes finally stumbling into each other. There was no rush, no script, just pent-up longing, just the now. His hands explored my arm with an almost studied delicacy, as if each movement informed the next. The kisses grew fuller, less innocent. Up to that point, it wasn't desire that dominated, it was discovery. Like someone who, after a long time fumbling in the dark, finally finds a faint light and takes a deep breath. When Caleb lay on his side on the couch, pulling me with him, our bodies sought a new intimacy made of fits and spaces that completed each other like pieces that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to recognize each other. The skin-on-skin contact was like walking barefoot on warm earth after a cold night. Each slide of fingers sparked tiny embers. Each close breath was laden with moisture, warmth, and intention. My hand gently traced the fabric of his shirt until it found the skin of his waist, warm, smooth, alive. He sighed against my mouth, a low, intimate sound that reverberated directly in my stomach. I responded with slow touches along his back, recognizing new contours, as if mentally drawing a map only I could decipher. Neither of us said anything. Only our gazes understood each other, and our bodies, patiently, adapted. The couch was too small, and at some point, we stood up like people who know they need space to truly dive in. We went to the old mattress on the floor, in a silent transition, as if the universe had rehearsed it 1,000 times for it to happen now. There, lying side by side, our shirts came off almost by chance. The direct touch from the beginning was more about truth than extravagance. His skin, upon contact with mine, seemed to trigger an alarm that didn't scream or beg. It just awoke, as if to say, "You are here. This is real." I kissed his shoulder with the care of someone writing a long letter with chosen words. Every part of our touch was an unspoken conversation, a mutual permission. There was no shame, no guilt, no rush to take off or expose. There was a deep respect for each other's time, and when we truly surrendered, it was in the most human way. It was as if aligning with another body was, at that moment, the only thing that truly made sense in the world. Our intertwined hands at the end weren't a cliché romantic gesture. They were shelter. They were an unexpected bond. Lying there, sweaty, exhausted, and alert at the same time, Caleb let out a husky, unintentional laugh. "You look different now," he said, looking directly at me. "It's the first time in a long time I've felt here." He pulled the sheet up to his shoulders and rested his head on my chest. We just lay there. That's it. At peace. The silence of the house that late afternoon seemed endless. Caleb was still lying on me, breathing slowly. Every now and then, I'd feel his fingers drawing something invisible with the tip of his index finger on my stomach. as if it were possible to immortalize that moment in invisible lines. It was a good silence, one that didn't demand explanations, didn't require words. But every minute that passed brought with it a new awareness, that something had changed. Because it was more than skin, more than desire. It was accepting a space within me that I thought was unreachable, and allowing someone to enter without knocking, and stay. I felt a slight pang in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was responsibility. I looked at him, lying there, so young and yet so present, and I wondered where all of this would lead. Before I could say anything, Caleb looked up and whispered, "You're overthinking." I smiled faintly. "It's my flaw. I knew you before I even knew you," he said. "And even if this only lasts a weekend, it was worth it." I was silent for a while. His sincerity disarmed me. "What if it lasts longer?" He answered without hesitation. "We'll see together." Later, dressed and wandering around the kitchen, he made coffee, the way he'd seen me do it once. Strong, unsweetened. We sat at the table like two friends sharing a memory. No one said out loud what had changed, but we knew. And as he smiled, looking out the window, as if observing a new version of the yard, all I could think was, maybe the hole in that fence wasn't a flaw. Maybe that's exactly where my life decided to break through. The next day, the sun seemed to rise differently. Not hotter or brighter, but more honest. It was as if things were clearer. The contours of the house, the leaves on the tree near the fence, even the sound of the wind seemed more consistent. We slept very little, sharing the cramped mattress and thin blanket as if it were the only thing keeping us anchored. Caleb woke up before me and spent some time simply watching me, as if he wanted to memorize everything. The side I slept on, the rhythm of my breathing, maybe even the way my chest slowly rose and fell. When I opened my eyes, he was already waiting for me, propped on his elbow. The same crooked smile, the one that says good morning, without needing a sound. "Are you hungry or wary?" he asked. No beating around the bush. "A little of both," I replied, honestly. And it was true. Part of me just wanted to stretch this out indefinitely. Cook eggs together. Listen to music in the room. Understand how Caleb liked his coffee. What he hated about Sundays. But another part, that part that always hesitates, kept reminding me of the age difference. My mom's house next door. The assumptions that could arise from the outside. He noticed, of course. He was too sensitive not to see the movie playing behind my eyes. He was silent for a while, like someone carefully choosing words with the same precision as someone trying to cross a river without relying on the current. "You don't owe me any explanation," he said, pulling the pillow onto his lap. "I didn't come here expecting this to turn into a life plan for anyone. But it happened," I murmured. "And that's enough." We watched time pass through the window, the branches dancing slowly as if the whole city was waiting for our decision. My mom would be back that night. His uncle would arrive from his trip in the late afternoon. Our time, at least that intimate space, had an expiry date. But Caleb didn't seem rushed. Not fixated on the idea of continuing or stopping. He was just there, whole, present. And that was enough for me. We walked together to the street, with the sun almost scorching and the air shimmering above the asphalt. Neither of us held the other, but we didn't try to speed up either. Every movement had weight. Instinctively, he held my hand on the park sidewalk. "I don't think this story is just this," he said. "Me neither," I replied, looking straight ahead. We sat under the old tree on the bench that used to be empty most of the day. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his backpack. Crumpled paper, worn edge. He handed it to me with a complicit smile. "I made this before we actually talked," he explained. "I guess I needed to vent with a pencil." I carefully unfolded the sheet. It was a drawing. Me, from behind, sitting in the porch chair, my hair messy, a mug in my left hand. On one side, the fence. On the other, the void. Just me, filling everything he could see with his gaze. I couldn't say anything. The paper said it all. I held the drawing firmly and said what my body had been screaming for days. "Let's see where this goes." He nodded. No wide smile, no teary eyes. Just that subtle movement of someone who heard exactly what they needed to hear. "But slowly," I added. "Our way." "Our way," he repeated. There was no kiss under the sunset. No dramatic declaration. It wasn't goodbye. It was a brown beginning, the color of the fence, of the wood that witnessed everything in silence. A beginning full of gray spaces, but with a small, precise blue spark. A beginning with 2 feet on the ground, and a heart wide open in a beautiful imbalance. After Caleb left that afternoon, I decided not to push my chair against the wall anymore. I went back to using the porch with the door open. I went back to working with headphones and loud music like I used to. But now it was different. I had been seen. Truly seen. Without pretense. And I had seen too. Seen beyond the patterns of youth. Beyond the baggy clothes. Beyond the fear of bothering him. I had seen someone whole, wanting to connect. Maybe with the insecurity of someone still learning to trust themselves. Maybe with the silent courage of someone who looks through a wooden hole for weeks, waiting for something. I didn't know what would come of it. I didn't know if he would continue his studies in another city in the coming months. If time, expectations, the world, would take it down paths I couldn't control. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to predict everything, nor protect myself from everything. I was living, and more than that, I was allowing myself to be touched. When I went back to my room that night, I put the folded drawing in the old frame of an award-winning project from my Austin days. That simple, sincere sketch was worth more than any hanging certificate. It was memory and promise. Record and seed. It carried the weight of silent gazes, the hope accumulated in the warm air of the yard, and the certainty that, amidst all the loneliness and all the silences we pack throughout life, there's always a space for someone who dares to peek through a crack. If you've watched this story this far, you might have felt what I felt. That confusing mix of surprise and familiarity. As if something you've never experienced was, at the same time, something that had always been waiting for you. So hit that like button on the video if you believe in unlikely connections. Subscribe to the channel if you think the best stories are those that are born when we least expect them. Through a crack, a word, a touch. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. See the link in the description right now. And remember, sometimes all you need to do is look at that same fence again, because in the end, someone might be looking out for you too. See you in the next one. Julian.